Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Daniela Brito, curatorial specialist here at the Schomburg. Teaching Liberation, Education by Us, for Us is the inaugural program as part of Black on Screen, a century of radical visual culture. And this evening, we've taken a look back at Black-led classrooms from Harlem to Brooklyn, celebrating the production and protection of Black thought and self-determination in this moment where we need it both more than ever. I'd now like to welcome directors Tayo and Cynthia Giwa, as well as educator and activist Basir Mchawi, to continue the conversation. Afterwards, join us for a reception in the lobby, and stay tuned for more programs as part of this series coming up bi-weekly throughout the year and celebrating our collections here at the Schomburg.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
First, I'd like to give honor and praise to the ancestors, those who make it possible for us to be here through the trying situations that we as a people have gone through. So we need to do that first. I also want to specifically give honor and praise to those who lived, loved, and struggled at the East Organization and are now ancestors. I want to acknowledge one of the principal people in the film. Lumumba Bandeli is here. Lumumba, where are you? He's here with his wife and one of his daughters. I also saw an Uhuru Sasa student, Osei Wamble. Osei, where are you? I haven't seen everybody who's in here, so there may be some other Uhuru Sasa students here. Any other? No, I guess not. One of the things I say about this film is many of you may not be old enough to remember a series that came on television called The Naked City. And at the end of The Naked City, they would say, there are 8 million stories in the naked city, and this has been one of them. This film is important, very necessary, but it is one of many, many, many stories. And we have to continue to tell those stories so that we're clear about what the East was and what the East continues to be. I'm happy to be here with Cynthia and Tayo. One of the things I also have to say is the first part of the program dealt with IS 201 demonstration district. And for me, that's kind of a full circle moment because my first full-time teaching position out of college was in IS 201. I hope to see Ronald Evans, who was one of the first Black principals, here. And it's interesting because people like G2 Wayusi, Herman Ferguson, and others knew Ron Evans because there was just a group of progressive and radical Black educators at that time. And they had a nickname for him. They called him Knowledge. They called him Knowledge Evans. So I just had to say that because I don't know who knows that Ron Evans had that particular nickname. But I think if they called him Knowledge, it was significant in a lot of different kinds of ways.
What year were you at 201?
1970, right out of college. I graduated right out of college and went directly, only a few days, right into IS 201 while it was still a demonstration district. I remained there for a year because by 1971, the betrayal had actually happened and the demonstration districts were being dismantled. Anyway, for you, the filmmakers, first, what inspired you to make this particular film?
Thank you for that introduction, and also thank you to the Schomburg Center for screening this film. It's a huge honor for Tayo and I, as people who are sort of aspiring to be archivists. Like, this is the center for that. The film project grew out of an Instagram account that Tayo and I have run since 2018. It's called Black Owned Brooklyn, and thank you. Follow us on Instagram. And it's what it sounds like. It started as just telling the stories of Black-owned businesses in Brooklyn. That project has since evolved to be more about seeing ourselves as stewards of our history in Brooklyn as it's changing, especially. So the stories sort of evolved from telling the stories of this roadie shop or this record store to broader institutions and cultural movements in Brooklyn. But we first learned about the East while we were doing a story about the International African Arts Festival, and in our research learned that it began as a school fundraiser for the Yahuwah Sasha Shule, which was founded by the East, and we were sort of piecing that story together, and couldn't find a whole lot on it in our initial research just on the internet. So it was always kind of in the back of our minds, this seems like a pretty revolutionary story that we should know more about. So let's maybe revisit that later. And as we continued the work of interviewing business owners and institution founders through the work of Black Owned Brooklyn, the East kept coming up in conversations. People would say that they were inspired to become business owners through seeing the East as children or being involved in their programming in some way. So we just realized that it's sort of a through line in a lot of our work that we were doing anyway. So when it came time to tell a bigger story beyond Instagram, we knew that that's one of the first stories that we wanted to tell. I'll let Tayo tell some more on that.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you to the Schomburg for having us here. This is actually a dream for us to screen this film here and to be in this space, so we're ever grateful. Building on what Cynthia said, I mean, what was so fascinating to us is that we sort of stumbled upon this history in writing about the International African Arts Festival, but it was really in talking to folks in the community who kept bringing up the East time and time again. And it wasn't just sort of older folks who were part of the original generation who created and founded the East. It was sort of the children and people who were the children of the children. And we started to see that there was this long legacy that was tied to this history that was bigger than just the fact that this thing happened and a community was created. It was the fact that, at the time when we were, creating the film, it was around the 50th anniversary of the International African Arts Festival. So to us, that was kind of, fascinating that, this institution's been here 50 years, half a century. How many institutions do we have that have continued year after year in that way? And then thinking about all sort of the community leaders, people who are still in the community doing the work, who are still, singing the praises. And then there was this element of people saying how the East changed how they saw themselves, changed the trajectory of their life and how they viewed themselves in society. And so then just hearing people talk about it in that way, we realized that it was such a deeper story that we really needed to sort of lay it out in a way that more people could share in that history and understand the influence it has in central Brooklyn and beyond.
What were some of the challenges you faced in regards to going ahead and pulling this off and putting this together?
I mean, lots of challenges. Making a film is hard. We are independent filmmakers, so no one came and gave us money to do this. This was all just passion work that we did. So on one hand, it's a daunting task to sort of put together a production. On the other hand, it's also, Cynthia and I came to this as outsiders to a community, and so to come in and want to tell a story, that's really difficult, and it requires that you have to listen and to build some trust to do that. And so I think navigating those barriers, I think were the sort of the initial steps that I think, how are we going to even tell this big story? How are we going to produce it? And how are we going to get people to actually tell us what happened and trust us that we are coming to this in a sincere intention?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there were a lot of challenges in making the film, but one of the things that made it easier is that we had a lot of trust and a lot of access to the story and the documents and all of these artifacts that the East has compiled and collected and kept alive themselves. I mean, almost everything in the film was shared with us from you and others. All of those Black news covers, you gave us a bunch of those directly. And so I think we're extremely grateful to have had that trust from the founders and sort of early generation members of the East. And also, the East has been really wonderful at preserving their own history. It wasn't like we had to excavate all of this stuff from scratch. It was there. It was shared with us. So that helped a lot.
I think that's worth adding. I mean, thank you to the East family, and I think it's worth us sort of celebrating that the East family did an extraordinary job in preserving this history, and year after year they've continued to build family and continue that community. And I think from our perspective, because we weren't in the community, we were able to sort of almost see it from 100 feet, or 1,000 feet, whatever analogy works better. But we were able to maybe see it a little different because we weren't in it. And so leveraging the fact that the community, the East family, was so good in keeping records and knowing exactly, who did what and, the history of what had happened, that definitely made it easier for us to be able to tell this story.
From what you've learned through this particular experience, from the time the film premiered until now, what kinds of things do you think you might do differently based upon what you know now as opposed to what you knew when you started?
Well, you might notice that Cynthia and I did not sit in here to watch the film. We've seen it so many times. So every time I see it, I'm like, oh, we should have done that. We should have done this. And it's like, I think part of that is, filmmaking in general. At some point, you need to sort of stop and say, I think we did what we set out to accomplish. Certainly, I think if we had unlimited funds and unlimited time, there are things we could have done. And one thing that always strikes me is sort of the connection that the story of the East had to the broader movement for independence across the Black diaspora, the African diaspora that was happening at the same time. And I think that would have been worth exploring. We did talk about it a little bit with the farm in Guyana, but I think there's something to be said that there was independence brewing all over the world, in Africa, in South America, in the Caribbean. And so, tying that independence story to what the East was doing, I think was something would have been exciting for us to do had we sort of had that perspective at the time.
Yeah, I think all kinds of things. There's resources that we've come across later that I was like, man, if we had waited a few months, we could have had this in the movie. Or maybe, like Tayo said, it's a very wide story. We start with Brown v. Board of Education in 1964, and we really wanted it to be a tight movie, so we move along very quickly. It's a wide story. It's not always as deep in each piece of the story. So sometimes I do think we could have gone deeper, but I think that in many ways this film is a first offering, like you said. This is one of many stories. You could have done a whole film on just, the jazz scene. You could have done one movie just on the independent Black schools movement. There's a billion movies that can be and should be made on the East. So I think our intention was to kind of cover a lot of ground, keep it moving quickly so that people stay engaged and so that it's like accessible to lots of people. And so I feel like, and also to get it done and to get it made, right? Like we could spend 5 years making a movie. We spent 1 year making this movie. We really believe that, you don't have to let perfect get in the way of good. And so we did the movie. At a certain point, we had to take our hands off of it and put it out into the world. I still feel really proud of the project, but I feel like hopefully the idea with everything that we do, it's hopefully to inspire people to go forth and learn more and build on top of it. So that was sort of our mission there.
There's a deep intergenerationality to the East and the East family. And you've had an opportunity to experience that firsthand in a number of different ways. Talk a little bit about that, maybe as far as Little Sun People. Mama Fela Barcliff, the founder of Little Sun People, is featured in the film. You've had a child at Little Sun People. Two? Okay. All right, talk about the intergenerationality in regards to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the, my most favorite aspects of this story. It wasn't just a look back in history. It was the creation of community, creation of family. It is the East family. And so this idea that we weren't just building this thing for ourselves, we were building it for our future and the future of our community and our families. And so, in making this film, being able to sort of tap into that personally and now have our children, be part of this community, it's extraordinary. So, yeah, I mean.
Yeah, I think one thing that we tried to drive home in the film, particularly in the last quarter, is that, people ask us a lot, like, what, or people sort of opine that the East, like, ended, and it's such a shame that it doesn't exist anymore. Whereas our perspective is that it's still alive. The perspective and the contributions that members of the East have proliferated and reverberated throughout Brooklyn and beyond are still here. So whether that is places like Little Sun People or the artists like Dawana, who's in the film, like the activism of someone like a Lumumba. There's so many people like them that exist all throughout the world. And so it's not just about like, these are the people in 1969 who started this thing. It's about the intergenerational reverberations that it has created and continues to create. So I think just because something didn't exist in the exact same format in perpetuity doesn't mean that it was a failed project or doesn't mean that it ended. It shifted and evolved, and I think just because something doesn't exist in the same exact format forever doesn't mean that it's over. It's just changing and channeling in different ways. And so we talk to people of all different ages, and like we can like literally talk to our own children as evidence of the legacy that still is alive.
Now I'll give you the opportunity to ask me a question.
Yeah, we tried to ask all our best questions in the film, but I always found it was like so exciting to, revisit as we, spent a little bit of time early in the film around the sort of the jazz scene. I know you were, heavily involved with that in those early stages. Can you sort of, talk to us a little more about like, has there ever been anything quite like that since that, like in the sense that, 10 Claver Place was just like this like small building. It was within the community, yet it was drawing some of the most world-renowned musicians in the world. have you since seen anything like that? Like, has there ever, like, was that just one of one, that experience?
Well, it was kind of unique. You know, you have to say, when you're able to bring in some of the top names in the music world, and when you look at those who performed at the East, whether you talk about Pharoah Sanders, Max Roach, Betty Carter, Sun Ra, folks from, you know, as people talk about Afrofuturism now, where do they go? They talk about Sun Ra. They don't know anything about Sun Ra. But the story's being told. As a matter of fact, Stanley Nelson has finished a film on Sun Ra, which should be on PBS, I would guess, this month, next month, very soon. And I know a lot of people are really looking forward to it. But we were able to develop relationships with these musicians which were unlike anything that they had experienced. When you went into a jazz club in Manhattan, you had liquor being served, you had people talking loud, you had people smoking, you had all different kinds of things happening, which in some instances were disrespectful. So you had, you know, people talk about how Miles Davis would sometimes turn his back to the audience. He would turn his back to the audience because they were disrespecting him on a regular basis. So when these musicians came to the East, which was smoke-free, no alcohol, good food, and the kind of reception that these musicians would get was unbelievable. I'll give you an example. Sonny Rollins came to the East. And, you know, he came out with a group, and we just announced the great Sonny Rollins. And the audience just stood up and started yelling and screaming and applauding. And they said, genius. They said everything. It was, and Sonny went ahead. He looked out at the audience and looked around at this. And he came back, picked up his tenor saxophone, and played like he has never, ever, ever played. And I've seen Sonny Rollins play a number of times, but that particular performance was like nothing else because it was a conversation. You know, Mensah talked about how people in the audience would bring shaker rays and bells and would get up and scream. One of the things that happened, the album, Pharoah Sanders Live at the East, wasn't recorded at the East. What they did is they brought part of the East audience to another location and recorded that. Now, when you listen to the album, you hear some of the same kinds of energy which the East became famous for. But based upon everything, and you know, people talk about a small building, but one of the interesting things is when you went inside the East and you opened the doors and you looked at the way we had everything set up, there's one photo of the East crowd that's in the film, you could put a lot of people in there. But the idea that these musicians, and you know, we could go and the litany and list of musicians is just really, really amazing. And to do it right off of Fulton Street, Claver Place, right in the community. Now, it's not the first time. You know, you had the Blue Coronet, you had, Pumpkins, you had numbers of other clubs. You know, when you talk about Harlem, you had Count Basie's, you had other places. But the kind of atmosphere, environment that was created at the East was literally like no other. Now, people try to talk about it, and in terms of, and in some instances they don't. I'll give you a good example. What was looked at as the definitive biography of Sun Ra was by this guy named John Swed. He doesn't mention the East. he doesn't mention the African Street Carnival. Sun Ra came out and performed at the first African Street Carnival. And one of the interesting things, of course, that people also think is, well, black people don't like that kind of music. That music is too far out. But when you came to Claver Place, when Sun Ra performed, you would see everybody and their mama out on Claver Place, just enjoying Sun Ra and everybody else that we had performing. There are, you talk about Sister's Place, but Sister's Place can't ever go ahead and create the kind of environment that we were able to create at the East. It's just not possible. So, we'll see what happens, but to give you some examples.
There's a YouTube clip of audio from the East, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
I wish I had the name of it off the top of my head, but I've definitely heard it. It's incredible. It's so, it's communal. There's a lot of participation, and of course, they say that in the film, yeah, the audience participated, but to hear it is so different. It's just a spiritual thing. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm telling you about this thing. I don't know what it's called, but it's on YouTube. So there's just that one thing. So my question for you is a question that we get a lot. People are like, do you think that the East, in the way that it existed previously of community institution building, this great sacrifice for the collective, building and pushing, could happen again today? And I'm always kind of my sense is that it was a really special time, and it's not really an apples to apples comparison, even though there's obviously a lot of parallels between youth energy, galvanizing, doing incredible work. But anyways, I'm just curious about your perspective on that as someone who was there.
Well, I think there are numbers of things that we can learn from the East, and we have to, and I don't think that all of those particular lessons have really been looked at and definitely have not been absorbed. One of the things that we learned very, very clearly is the idea of collective leadership, that we cannot depend on individual charismatic leadership if we want to do anything, because whether we talk about the Garvey movement, whether we talk about Brother Malcolm, whether we talk about SCLC and Dr. King, all you have to do is cut off the head, and the organization dies. So one of the things that I think is really important is that we understand collective leadership, and in moving forward in this particular time, that we understand that and make that operational. The idea, I think that the East is unique in so many different kinds of ways because so many different forces, historical and otherwise, all were able to interact at a particular period in time. And I think that was critically special. I see myself, and I look at all the things that I have seen, all the things that I've done, and I mean, it's amazing. The kinds of skills that we learned at the East, which cannot be quantified. Diplomatic skills. Let me give you an example. We've had the opportunity on the international level to meet with heads of state, to interact with them, and this was, not anything that you go ahead and, learn in political science in a college class. These are things that we actually picked up, and there were a few of us who became really good at that in terms of diplomatic things that we could do. Lumumba's father, in the film, Brother Adiemi, myself. And in terms of the international kinds of work, this is something that we have to really explore further. one of the problems that we sometimes have in terms of academics, people in academia, and I'm one of them sometimes, you know, I've been in and out, you know, I've escaped from the plantation several different kinds of times. They make wrong conclusions about things that have happened, and they do so without really, I guess, trying to consult the people who might have been there. So as an example, and I'll just give you one. In Guyana, the East had a very, very specific kind of relationship with Guyana and the Guyanese government. Baba Herman Ferguson, who was going to be a political prisoner before, we were able to go ahead and get him to Guyana, where he became a political exile and stayed for many, many years. There are academics who don't know about that or don't talk about that. And in many instances, we don't talk about, you know, all the kinds of things that we were able to accomplish internationally. But to give you an example, this one brother I won't even mention, you know, he talks about in a book how we were in bed with Forbes Burnham and the Guyanese government in a particular kind of way. We had people in the East organization who were in Guyana who were part of Walter Rodney's organization, the Working People's Alliance. So you can't say that we're in bed with Forbes Burnham if we've got people in WPA. Now, of course, some of the academics, they don't know that. But, you know, as time moves on, and, you know, some of us like myself, you know, I have to start thinking about my expiration date. G2 Wayusi made his transition at 73 years old. I'm older than that now. So what it means to me is that there's just so much work that has to be done now, and we don't have a lot of time. Institutional assistance. I'll give you an example of something that went really, really wrong that happened here at the Schomburg. There was a Black Power 50 exhibit that was here. No mention of the East, no mention of Uhuru Sasa. There was a whole wall on education. They had the Oakland Community School, which was founded after Uhuru Sasa. Something else which many of us felt was kind of, you know, really out of line. They had blown up a page from a book that was published by the East called Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow, Jana Leo na Kesho in Swahili. And one of the particular pages was like a cartoon that had been done by a brilliant artist. People talk about Emory Douglas from the Black Panther Party, former Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party, and all of his grassroots art. But the grassroots artists at the East, Setu Jim Dyson, Ogundipe Fayomi, the kinds of work that they did, which mirror to an extent the kinds of work that Emory Douglas was doing on the coast for the Black Panther Party. Emory Douglas talks about, I made illustrations so that people who couldn't read or wouldn't read the paper would understand what it was that we were talking about without reading it. When you look at the covers of Black News by these particular artists, it's amazing. Got to tell you, I'm working on a project with one of the surviving artists. Jim Setu Dyson is an ancestor. Ogundipe Fayomi is here. We're working on a project now where we can talk about and look at some of the visual richness of the East. Ahmed Sekou Toure says, revolution is first an act of culture. and that one of the things we were clear about at the East is the role of culture. We look at it in terms of our children, the songs and rituals. My oldest daughter on Facebook, not too long ago, she just put down some words from one of the songs that everybody would sing at the East, and I'll recite them. Like they say, a man's got to know his limitations, so I'm not going to sing it. And the song says, "Black is beautiful, this I know, because Brother Malcolm told me so. By any means is what he said, unite brothers and sisters and have no fear. Yes, black is beautiful. Yes, black is beautiful. Yes, black is beautiful. Brother Malcolm told me so." I was at a meeting of the UNIA, and they ran up the flag, red, black, and green, and then they sang the song that was created by Baba Yusuf Iman at the East, "Praise the red, the black, and the green." That's right. That's right. Open up your eyes and see, et cetera, right? And they acknowledged that the brother who led the song at UNI said, "I learned this at the East." So that there are elements that work throughout what it is that we do, and ways that we know, and in some ways that we don't know. And hey, we just have to make the best of this particular time, because there is so much still left to do and say. We got to get ready for questions and answers. Questions, and how we're going to do this in terms of Q&A, because it's time, right?
If you have a question, you can just come to one of the two mics here.
We ready to start?
Yes, we're ready to start. Go ahead, brother.
First of all, I want to just express my appreciation for this film that you have produced about this wonderful institution, the East. And the first part of my question is, based on what you said in the exchange and the dialogue, are you going to take some of the threads that were not explored and maybe go to another film yourselves, as well as leave it open for other people to build and further on your work?
Yeah, I mean, we hope that others take inspiration from the film and focus in on all of the different elements that have room to explore. I don't know if that are we going to do it? I don't know that we're going to do it in this moment, but who knows what the future has in store.
Well, I figured you might, based on your conversation, you said you discovered things in the process that would make it easier. So I figured at least one sequel from you guys would probably be, a good piece. Oh, key point. I want to know, can you get that on actually physical DVD, a copy of the work that you've done?
We've been getting questions on that. We got to talk to our distributor, but we would love to do that.
All right. Thank you.
You can get it online. I would say it's on YouTube, Amazon, Tubi, and please leave comments online. We would really appreciate that as an indie filmmakers. Every single piece of attention that people bring to the film is meaningful to us.
Hi, can you talk a little bit about the economical part of starting a Black institution for now? A lot of people aren't interested in the hard labor that comes with institutions like these. So what would you say for people who, want to start an institution? There's a whole business aspect. So just talk about the business aspect for us, please.
I'm just going to talk briefly, and then I'll leave it to the Black business people here. But One of the problems I think that we sometimes have in terms of a radical or revolutionary vision is that somehow resources and money doesn't come into the picture. And it does very, very clearly, that we need money to go ahead and run an institution. And the East as a model was very, very clear in regards to that, why we developed all of these particular businesses and institutions that ran around Uhuru Sasa, the school. So I think it's very critical for people to understand the importance of economics in whatever it is that we do. And in terms of the business aspect, I'll leave that to them right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a tough question. I mean, I don't know that I have a perfect answer, but what I think we learned in, studying the East, a lot of their success came from the actual building of the community and having a shared goal with a community and people willing to put the work to build. Sometimes people can get lost in sort of the end state of like, I want to, I want the glory of building something. And what it seemed to us in learning about the East was that there were a lot of people who were willing to be sort of soldiers in the movement to do the work to build, and less for sort of the personal glory and attention. And that allowed them to sort of build more. And so almost decentering individual attention and glory and building for the broader community. I think that was one of the lessons that I think we took from the East and some of their success.
Hi, I just want to say that it's been really amazing to be here and watch your film, because I actually am a part of the generational transfer of the East and the Uhuru Sasa, because my parents actually met at the Uhuru Sasa, and they're like a Uhuru Sasa couple. So I just wanted to say that it was like really wonderful to come and learn about like a school that I heard about in my childhood over and over again. So I guess my question for you guys is that I grew up hearing a lot about the involvement of like, the Black Panther Party at the Uhuru Sasa, and I guess I wanted to ask you more about like what that was like.
When you talk about the Black Panther Party, from those of us who live in New York, you have to talk about two realities. You have to talk about the West Coast, and you have to talk about the East Coast. Very different. West Coast, with the exception, well, you can't even say in terms, I was going to say, with the exception of Geronimo Pratt, you can't talk about anybody who had an African name. But Geronimo is not an African name. East Coast, we can go on, Afeni Shakur, all the Shakurs, Afeni Shakur, Asada Shakur, et cetera, right? Different. We had relationships with many different organizations, both above ground and underground. One of the things that I did as the editor of Black News is that we would publish communiques from the Black Liberation Army in the newspaper. Now, the Black Liberation Army itself was an outgrowth of the East Coast Panther Party. We knew and know, so many people, now again, some who are ancestors. I think of folks from the party who would stop by, whether it was Afeni Shakur or Safia Bukhari, so many different people. Abdul Majid, yeah. Majid was somebody. Bashir Hamid. We had good, and in many instances, personal relationships with people in the Panther Party. I think it was, to an extent, when we look at some of those particular relationships, and when we look at the government's involvement, both in terms of the dissolution of the Black Panther Party, the same kinds of things happened. Because we had those particular kinds of relationships, it meant that we were, as an institution, under great scrutiny as well. And one of the things that we haven't really totally come to grips with is all of those things which actually led to the final demise of the East. But we had relationships very clearly with people in the Black Panther Party. Some good folks. The Shakurs, all of them, they were like in awe, because, you know, Mama Sada's still alive. They salt of the earth people. I mean, just wonderful, wonderful, wonderful folks, you know, who I've known personally.
And some of their children went to Sasa.
Hey.
That's awesome.
All right, so I guess this is my question.
Yeah.
So I actually have like two small questions. First, for the filmmakers, was there any copywriting or like, you know, things of that sort that you guys had issues with that you had to like overcome in terms of getting the film completed legally? And then second, to Mr. Basir, very embarrassing, but I'm actually would really love to speak to you about maybe some mentorship. I have an event coming up in October. I've been in community for a little bit now, but it's a Halloween event. I'm actually doing it in collaboration with the Cultural Museum of African Art in Bedside, Brooklyn at the Restoration Plaza. So it's going to be happening both a week-long event for Halloween, both here in Harlem, trying to unify both communities and bring the youth and, you know, the older generation out to again, just be communal and bring about peace. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, making a documentary is a huge undertaking in terms of securing rights and permissions. A lot of the archival work, you know, as we mentioned, came directly from the East family. But, you know, there's significant research that we were able to, you know, get, you know, archival photographs from NYU special collections, particularly around the community control experiment, which was an extraordinarily well-documented event. And so there was that. And, you know, some of the archival photographs came from the People's World Daily, interestingly enough. And, you know, they were proud to give us permission to use these films. Even funnier, the UFT actually had some of the photos, and it was interesting to ask them for the photos, but they were cool with it too.
And also the University of Washington at St. Louis had the footage of G2AUC speaking about the community control experiment and how the East grew from that. That was actually outtakes from Eyes on the Prize. He was interviewed for it. That wasn't in the final cut, but they had it. And like there was a process of getting it from them, but that was just like a really lucky thing that a lot of it honestly was like stumbled upon in really lucky ways, but there are incredible research libraries, of course, that, you know, were super helpful in that process.
Got time for two more.
Yes, hi. Hello. I am a past student of Uru Sasa, 76 and 78. Forever a Brooklynite. G2YUC was our sequoia tree. He was Brooklyn. He supported so much in Brooklyn. And yes, to say, to agree with what was said as to how many things he was involved in, how many things that he had influenced, how many things, it's enormous. It's enormous. So my question is, knowing this, finding these things out, are you interested in doing a series? Because it's so much greatness that it would require like a series of episodes on the things that he has done, because it's like, it's amazing. And you mentioned the UFT. A lot of people do not know the story of G2's involvement with the UFT. They had a documentary that featured on Channel 13 15 years ago that talked about how the teachers union came about. And it started at Lefferts Junior High School. when it was taken over by the community. And G2 was very instrumental in that. What then came after was also his involvement with one of the premier junior high schools at the time in Brooklyn called Mahalia Jackson. Fantastic school. It was beyond what people expected. So many people were trying to get their kids into that school when it opened. But again, would you all be interested in doing a series of, episodes learning about the things that came about from the East?
Let me just say one thing in terms of, there's a biography of G2 being worked on by Brother Brian Purnell that should be finished shortly. There's some issues, I guess. This is a really interesting time to be delving into some of the things that G2 was involved in and some of the things that G2 rightly or wrongly became known for. But Brian Purnell is working on that particular piece.
Awesome.
Say anything in the...
I would also want to shout out the East Sisterhood book that Sister Malika Aman curated and edited. It came out a couple years ago. There are more things that have come out after this film that we want to draw attention to. I'm not exactly sure where you can get that book, but maybe we can connect afterwards and we can get you connected to that.
Okay.
But I mean, like we said, there's countless stories to be mined in this one institution. But I don't know. I don't know that we're...
I'll never say never. I mean, I'm always open to it and to learning about G3's history, which was extraordinary, and his leadership in Brooklyn and beyond. There's so much there, and so I'm excited to read Brian's book when it comes out, and we're certainly excited to learn more and support more telling of G2's history specifically.
Awesome.
Yeah, in terms of resources, and one of the things I carried around, I learned this from Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Who used to carry books all the time. I got a few things here. This is Voices of the East, which we did the 50th anniversary of the East back in 2019. It's important because it has a lot of the actual voices of the East in terms of people who were there, who made comments in terms of talking about their time, and also a lot of the visuals that we talked about. I also have one other thing with me, which is in terms of the educational piece, a book, We Are an African People, by Russell Rickford, an important piece as far as understanding the Black independent schools movement, which the East was critically involved in. Anyway, brother.
Oh, and also Dr. Kwesi Kanaju's book, A View from the East. He was in the film. That's also a wonderful text about the broad history.
Which is now in paperback, too, so you can get it.
We need to wrap it up there, sadly, but thank you so much, Basir, Tayo, and Cynthia for your incredible conversation, the film, and thank you all for joining us here in...
And let me just quickly say that since this is the 100th anniversary of Schomburg and what Schomburg became the Schomburg Center, we are happy to actually have kicked this off in the fall series here.
Yeah. And please stick around for the reception in the lobby. And if you're a former alum of Uhuru Sasa Shul, we'd love to get a photo of you all together. It'd be wonderful.